we should be in a state where our standard of living just improves over time, because technology makes the world better over time, right? Like things should become more efficient, they should become cheaper, because as technology advances, that's the gift that it should give to us. That's what our human ingenuity brings. So it should be rising global life standards over time thanks to technological advancement.
Mm-hmm.
And what inflation is sort of robbing that from us. It's rising costs to match these rising standards. We should be getting this great benefit from rising technology. Instead, it's being stolen by inflation. And it would be wonderful if that didn't happen. I would love everyone's living standard to naturally improve over time. People feel better about the world. And instead, we have this other thing. You can just look at the data. There's plenty of historical data on this. In terms of how economic growth happened during areas of hard money versus areas of fiat money, and we can't be naive about it from a hard money perspective. There is a downside to it, which is that you tend to have more economic volatility, and that sort of negative events aren't cushioned by credit in the way that they have been under a fiat standard. And that makes sense, right? Like if you think about what the government has done during recessions and spending more, that sort of brings things up. It's like having a credit card, to go back to that analogy. And if you lose your job, like, yes, your experience is a little bit better because you can charge things on it and you build up debt. The challenge is that the payment comes due eventually. And so that suppression of volatility in the day-to-day economic life comes due in an amplified version at the end, and it sort of all sort of unspools. And that's the real risk. So it's not the case that economies grind to a halt. That's just not what the data says. What the data says is you go from having a little bit less day-to-day volatility and more episodic giant setbacks versus having a little bit more day-to-day volatility, but no big collapse at the end. And I don't know, choose for yourself which of those you want. But I don't love the episodic collapse. That's not something that I'm in the market for. And I think that's what the data suggests.
We touched on this just briefly a little bit, but I would love for you to unpack some of your thoughts just on Bitcoin lending. Obviously, with Jack Mallers is announced, and I want to touch on also in a minute, obviously Saylor and the Bitcoin treasury companies, Nakamoto, 21 Capital, and what's going on there. But we now see the lending space. And again, you briefly touched on this before, but I would love for you to unpack some of your thoughts of what you think this might unlock going forward. Maybe it's reduced selling pressure because people are now, we talked about capital gains and some of those things earlier, but also conversely, you have maybe funds or Bitcoin that's not moving as much because now people are lending and borrowing against it and taking fiat out. So I'd love for you to unpack some of your thoughts and what we're just really starting to kind of see break out, it feels like.
Yeah, this feels like a pretty big theme. I mentioned that there are a lot of investors with a lot of Bitcoin that have fiat-based expenses that they need to pay. And there are various ways to handle that, whether that's some of the emerging staking things or option overwriting on Bitcoin. But lending is going to be a piece of that. And Bitcoin is pristine collateral, so it makes a great tool for lending activity. And as it's established into the mainstream, and as you see the integration of traditional finance and Bitcoin, which is what we're seeing in a major way right now, it becomes much easier to do that sort of lending activity. I do think the effect on the market will be on the margin reduced selling pressure. In the same way that maybe in other crypto assets, you've seen staking reduce selling pressure as well. That's sort of a similar concept. Very, very different, I should be clear, but sort of a concept of generating income on existing position. Mm-hmm. And I think this is going to be a pretty big theme. The financialization of Bitcoin is a big theme right now. That takes place through the options market, but it also takes place through lending. So I think we're in inning 0 of the Bitcoin lending boom, and it probably has a long way to run.
So Saylor, obviously the most famous so far of the Bitcoin treasury strategy, and really pioneering a lot of different of the legacy world, marrying a lot of the legacy tools and whether it's innovating things, but also using the legacy tools available to innovate on top of Bitcoin. What do you see? And he's also coined this, obviously, the next 10 years, this Bitcoin gold rush. number one, I guess, do you foresee anyone being able to catch Saylor and strategy and what they're doing? But also, is this something that we're just going to continue seeing? Like, I feel like it was like 7 or 70 last year companies. I can't remember my years and the numbers now, but now there's like 700 companies doing this. And now is it going to be 7,000 by the time we're at the Vegas conference next year? Like, how do you see this kind of playing out in the coming months and years here?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a real boom in this over the next 4 or 5 months. There's still behind the scenes, there are a huge number of deals coming through of people raising capital to do these Saylor-like strategies. I think you're going to see various different shots on goal. So I don't think anyone can out Saylor in what he's doing. He both has the brand and the recognition and the balance sheet that gives him the flexibility to design all these different types of approaches. But you're going to see other approaches, right? You're going to see permanent capital vehicles that just raise Bitcoin and then generate income off of it from things like lending. You're going to see these Bitcoin treasury companies emerge in every market around the world. It's no surprise to me that Metaplanet in Japan is one of the most successful and most volatile of these because they have a very harsh tax regime on holding Bitcoin directly. And so this is another way of gaining that exposure. You're going to see these in every market around the world. I don't think we're at the end of this boom. I think we're probably in the middle of it. And I think, particularly early this fall, we're really going to see a big peak in it, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, I mean, Saylor is great for the space, and he owns a lot of Bitcoin. I don't think that trend is actually going to slow down anytime. I don't think it's going to slow down as soon as people think. I think this financialization of Bitcoin, this ability to raise debt or equity instruments into Bitcoin, I think there's still some legs to go on this train. So I do think it's continuing.
Do you think so? That makes me think of something. I'm going to bump this to now. I was going to ask you in a tiny bit, but cycle, where we're at in the cycle versus super cycle. Everyone's got their different opinion. Like, it's going to be a super cycle. We're not going to have the 4-year cycle anymore, and everyone's got a different angle, seemingly, of like how they're going to look at it. And it makes me think of, there's a lot of companies. I mean, Saylor, like you said, and he's got many advantages. Are we going to see? So, two-parter, I guess. Where do you see us in the cycle? And do we have our normal 4-year cycle, or do we hit a super cycle? And then also conversely, are we going to have a 50% drop again, depending on what your answer is, I guess? Do we have a 40, 60, 80% drop at some point? And then all of a sudden, a lot of these companies are looking around like, how do you see this playing out in the coming quarters and in next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think the cycle is going to be as pronounced. In fact, I'm bullish on 2026. The reason for that is I think the two primary drivers of the cycle are the Bitcoin halving and then the economic cycle. It's tended to be aligned with monetary liquidity and with interest rates. That's the economic cycle. And then obviously the Bitcoin halving moves on a 4-year basis. The reason I bring those up is because both of those forces, in my perspective, are weaker now than in previous cycles. The Bitcoin halving gets half as important every time from a supply perspective. That's just sort of math in terms of the amount of supply being cut on a daily basis. And the monetary macro cycle is just no longer on the same 4-year cadence that it was, right? We're already at 4.5% interest. The likely next step on interest rates is down, not up. Monetary liquidity is actually accelerating, not decelerating. So I think it's just in a different place than it was sort of further in the past 4-year cycles. At the same time, we have institutional capital moving in, which is like a 5 to 10-year trend. And I just think that's a more powerful force than these historical drivers of the cycle. So I'm optimistic on 2026. I don't think there's a super cycle, though, and I don't think we've repealed volatility by any means. I think the thing to watch from a volatility perspective is how much leverage builds up in the system. Leverage can build up in the futures market. Leverage can build up in the lending market. Leverage can build up through these companies in the debt markets. As we look at it right now, the market's not particularly leveraged. But that doesn't mean it won't be, right? Like if the price dramatically detaches from $100,000 and starts running up.
If you like that clip, then you definitely got to check out this next spicy clip. I think you're really going to like it. Come on, check it out. But if you want the full version, the full interview, then check that out over here. Come on, do it. I'll see you in there.